All right, we're going to look at an incident in the Bible. We'll call it an incident in Mark 10. We're just cruising right through Mark. We're up to Mark 10. We picked up right where we left off listen to me, last week. This week went so fast it seems like yesterday. We're starting in verse 40, with verse 46, and we're going to read right to the end of the chapter, verse 46 to the end, 52. And it reads as follows. Then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus. "Your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. May the Lord bless the reading of his word. You know, when I started this message, when we were at the supper the other night, we were talking, and Pastor Rob, who's at Greencastle, new pastor there, he says he's never given his message a title. I said, I always give my message a title or something. And sometimes I think of it at the beginning, and sometimes I'm thinking it right at the beginning, at the end, and I think, this would be a good title for the message. And this week I started with a title, but now I don't know if it's the right title, but we'll go with it. But I was just amazed he never had a title. So I entitled this, "What Do You Want?" Because that is the biggest line in this whole passage that really stands out to me, and we'll get into it as we go along. But I think Jesus asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want?" And he asks us, "What do we want?" And how do we talk to Jesus? How do we talk to God? Well, we do it through prayer. And there's many passages in the Bible we could look at if we wanted to study prayer, if we wanted to understand prayer more, and if we wanted to get a better understanding of prayer. Even the disciples went up to Jesus and said, "Teach us to pray," and that's where we get our Lord's Prayer. That's both in Matthew 6, 9 to 13, and Luke 11, 2 to 4. He gave the Lord's Prayer. Now, there's been many debate over the years as to, yes, that's word for word what you need to say, and some people just say, no, it's just a guideline of things that you need to pray for, and you can pray for them however you want, in whatever order you want. And I don't think we'll solve the debate today, but I think prayer, no matter how you want to approach the Lord's Prayer or prayer in general, is something that needs to be not only a part of our life, but a huge part of our Christian walk. And not something that's an exception, but that's expected. And we should be praying all the time. Prayer without ceasing, we're told. And we look at these two passages, and we look at others for prayer. And they're great to get an understanding of prayer. But I think as we go along, you'll see how this passage itself teaches a little bit about prayer, among other things, because much is going on in this passage. Because not only do we talk about Bartimaeus, but we talk about the crowd, we talk about Jesus, and we learn about Jesus, his life and his ministry, and things that we need to apply to our lives when it comes to that. And we do see the impact that he had on Bartimaeus and all the other people for that matter. Now, this passage is also recorded in Matthew 20, but in there's two blind men. But here we're only talking about one. And I always, get into the Bible debates, well, if there's two, there can be one. So we looked at the one, and let's look at that. look at Bartimaeus. He was a blind beggar, and this is coming at a time. There wasn't a lot of social programs or outreach or different things that people could do if they were handicapped in any kind of way. And is the son of Tiamus, who they think was also a blind man. So he was a blind man, the son of a blind man. So I think that made his case so much worse. But when we have such a terrible case, then I think we can rejoice even more because we know how the story ends and we see that cure. So we should think of this when we think of our spiritual cures and what we go through and what we face in our lives. So as we saw last week, Jesus was telling disciples, as he had told them many times before, I need to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be sacrificed. All these things are going to happen to me. And some of the disciples were not even understanding it. And some disciples were saying, no, you can't be. It's not right. And we've got many discussions that way. But here they are on their way. And this is really the final stages of Jesus' journey and his earthly ministry. So they're located in Jericho, that we know, and that's wonderful that the Bible gives us so much information so that we can understand what's going on and where they're happening and what's happening. Because when we look around at the context, when we put it all together, then I think this story really comes to light and really starts to expand out. So he's on his way to Jerusalem. And we know the story of Jericho, how it was destroyed many, many times. So it's an old city. It's badly deteriorated. It's a bad part of the world that they're going through. And Herod had built his winter palace close by, but it was still, this was sort of the ruins and the rubble. But just in that alone, we see the wonder of Jesus and how he would talk to anybody and everybody. He stopped to talk to the poor. He stopped to talk to the well-off, the religious leaders, the religious followers. He would speak and talk and engage with anybody. And we see that here, which is so wonderful. And the way we need to be in our walk and how we portray ourselves. So he's walking and we're by Jericho. And it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but we got so much from the disciples beforehand and building up. But here there's not much talk or if any at all of the disciples other than that they were with them. So we see the passage unfold. And let's look into it. Jesus has a crowd around him. As at this point in his ministry, he's getting crowds everywhere and all over the place. But I think also we're having a huge pilgrimage off to Jerusalem for the Passover feast and the holidays coming up. And they're going through, because they have to go through that way, a desolate mountain country. Nowadays we fly from airport to airport and we never see the towns. And sometimes we have discussions with people and where'd you go? I don't know, we flew. And I heard a story this week of a lady, she booked a trip to Costa Rica and she thought she was from England. She thought it was somewhere in Spain. And she sat down and she saw the flight path and she said, that's not Spain. And she says, it's going to take 15 hours to get from England to Costa Rica. And she says, that's farther than Spain. So she ended up in Costa Rica for her holidays. And then we get different ways to travel, like train. Karen and I went on cross country from Pennsylvania right out to Seattle by train. It was a wonderful trip. Except my father, a little before we got on the train, he says, you know what, if you travel by train, you're going to see a lot of the countryside. But when you come into a city, you're going to see the worst of the city when you come into it because they don't put train stations by the nice places and the nice parts of town. And so it was. Every time you'd pull into a city, it'd be like, Well, this is not the very good part of the city. So Jesus, just by the fact that he's walking and he has to go everywhere, he goes through this part, and it's not the greatest. But here we go, and this is our story. So there would be lots of blind beggars and people asking for money for different reasons outside the gate. And this was not unusual for them coming up. But what's unusual in this account, when we read about it in Mark, is there's only one other place in chapter 5 that Mark gives somebody a name, that we get to know somebody by name. And that's with the synagogue ruler Jairus came to Jesus and asked for healing for his son. So we get this Bartimaeus, we get his name, and we get this person. Some scholars have said maybe he was famous in the church afterwards or worked in the church afterwards. We don't know this, and I didn't go beyond that for the study, and I thought we'll keep it to the passage. So the stage is set. They're going through this bad part of the world, part of town, whatever you want. And we see this interaction with Jesus and the blind man. So what do we know of this blind man? This Bartimaeus. We already had a little bit of information that his father was blind, so his father was probably a beggar as well because he couldn't work much. We don't know that for sure, but so he's obviously heard of who Jesus is. He has some idea, some inkling of understanding of who this Jesus is and what Jesus can do for him. So he's crying out in a loud voice, "Son of David, have mercy on me." I think that shows his conviction. He shows his belief in Jesus. He's had a good start and a good foundation. And he's crying out, he's yelling, he's shouting. I think we too can get to be that way. When we're desperate and we have no place else to turn, we cry out and say, "What can we do? Jesus, help me. Help me." So he's formed his ideas on what he's heard. That Jesus could restore his sight. And given what we know of the blind people and how he would be not able to do anything as a livelihood, especially in that day and age, even today, though limited, we have so many things to assist. I saw a video the other day where somebody clips on the side of their glasses and you shine it down on a text and the text is read in your ear. I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. So he wouldn't have anything to do. Now this is just a side. But those who, by the providence of God, are disabled or unable to get a livelihood with their own labors and have no other way for subsidies and subsidize themselves, I think we need to understand, we need to take in, and we need to give them charity, we need to help them. And especially I think of this in the children. So many times I think of this in the children. I always go back to this. You know, we had a man from a soup kitchen in the church I grew up in came by to give a talk to the men's group. And of course you always get somebody in the crowd. "Oh, those guys just get a job. You know, they're just lazy. They don't want to work." And he kind of tapped down the whole conversation. He says, 40% of my clientele at the soup kitchen are under the age of 12. So you can't really be telling them to go get a job. So I say, when we have that ability and we have so many people in need, we should do and help as much as we can. So the blind man is crying out to Jesus. But he's not just saying, "Heal me, I want this, I want this, I want this." As I said, he says, "Son, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he's saying it loudly. He's crying out to the Lord for mercy. "Have mercy on me, O Son of David." And he wants that mercy. That's what he wants. He wants to be healed, but he wants mercy. And he knows that Jesus can give it to him. I mean, he probably would have been, as most men of the day and women of that for that matter, would have been versed in the Bible. Isaiah 35:5 says, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped." So he knew that Jesus was coming. He knew that he could heal. And his eyes would be opened by this promised Messiah. So he trusted in that mercy and in that grace. And I love how Mark, because Matthew and Luke, where the story is recorded, says the Son of David, to show. Because Jesus didn't reject the title. He said, "No, I'm not the Son of David." But he knew what he was talking about. Jesus knew. He says, "You're the Messiah. You've come from the line of David. That's where the Messiah must come." So he's talking, he's saying, "Son of David." And Jesus didn't silence him, as you might have expected. Jesus would have quieted him if he was wrong, or if he was, we saw when Peter went against what Jesus was teaching, he said, "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus was not about keeping people quiet when they should have been quiet. And another thing, too, I think is really important here, we need to take it, if you want to take a mini lesson out of the lesson, is Jesus knew he had to get to Jerusalem. He knew that's where it'd be fulfilled. He knew that's where he'd be crucified. Because he kept telling the disciples, and finally got it, I think. So he was on a mission. He was on a mission, what needed to be done. But yet, he stopped and he took time. He stopped and he took time. And I think that's the way we need to be. We need to stop. We need to take time from time to time. So he's headed to Jerusalem. He's got the pilgrims around him. And he sees that here's the Son of David. And Bartimaeus is calling this out. But before he gains the attention, these people wanted him to be quiet, don't make so much noise. I want everything just to go the way it is. It's amazing how many times in Jesus' ministry he was told to be quiet. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, be quiet. And now here we have somebody calling out, and how he wanted to be cured. And Jesus stops. And we know that Jesus, throughout, we have the promises of Jesus way back in Isaiah, as I read part of it earlier. "Say to those who are fearful-hearted, be strong, do not fear." This is in Isaiah 35, 4 and 5. "Behold, your God will come with vengeance. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped." And also in 61:1, "The Spirit of the Lord God is open upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captive, and to open the opening of the prison for those who are bound." What a fantastic saying. He is here to help us. He is here to set us free. And he's on his way to Jerusalem to do what he wants to do for all mankind. But here we have this man who's crying out. And of course they rebuke them. Not only do they think that Jesus is on a task, but these pilgrims are like, we got to get going. We got to get to our destination. And as I said, sometimes we get too caught up on tasks. I've seen this in healthcare when I've worked people on task, and it's like, there's something more important happening over here. You got to stay on task. But sometimes we got to break from the tasks. And as I said, they would see lots of beggars on the road, asking for money, asking for different things. And that was just the way that it was operated, and that's the way it was. But he continues. Even though he's told to be quiet, Bartimaeus keeps shouting, and he keeps shouting. And I think we need to keep shouting sometimes. Stay on course. And we see Jesus stand still. Of all that he has to do and all that's going on, he stands still. And he says, bring him over to me. That's all he says, is just call them over to me. And now the people have changed their tune because they're following Jesus and they want to do it best. And they say to him, be of good cheer, rise. He is calling you. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that fantastic? Jesus is calling him after all that shouting. Even on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus had time to stop for this man, to help him in his faith and encourage him. So Jesus stops and he says, come to me. And we hear about he throws down his garment. He doesn't want anything to get in the way. You know, when I first read this study, I thought, well, what's so big about throwing on his garment? But if he's clothed, he can't see. And he's going to be trying to walk. He doesn't want to trip. He doesn't want to fall. He wants a straight path to Jesus. Because this is his time. This is his moment. And it's fantastic that Jesus has called him over. He's in great encouragement. He'll have hope. I mean, he just jumps up. I've been starting to go back to the gym, so I can't jump up to demonstrate. But he would jump up. But let us jump up to go to the Lord. And if we go to the Lord, we shall have what we've come for. We shall have what we want. So let us jump up. Let the guilty jump up. Let the empty, the tempted, the hungry, the naked be comforted. For he calls them to pardon, to supply, to fill, to clothe. And he doesn't do it just as an overall. He doesn't do it arbitrarily or impersonally. He does it to each and every person. And that's what we need to do. This poor blind man jumped up and he just threw away his outer garment. We're told he threw it aside and rose up and came to Jesus. Fantastic. What a wonderful story. Casting everything aside that would cause him danger, get in his way, and came to Jesus. He didn't want anything getting in his way, and we should let nothing get in our way. You know, many times I've heard in life and in the Bible, you know, we need to get away from these weights that would drag us down. And then as I was preparing this message, came to my favorite passage in the Bible. Is Hebrews 12:1. Therefore we also, since we've been surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So Bartimaeus threw off his cloak. Let us throw off our weights. And we see the response from Jesus. And this is the strangest response in the entire Bible as far as I'm concerned. You might find something different in ways of responses or something more stranger. But for me, this is very strange. Jesus, who has known about his crucifixion and his resurrection, told the disciples. Jesus, who knows what's going on all the time. Man, weeks back when the disciples were arguing who was the greatest, Jesus said, what were you talking about? He knew already. He knows everything. So even if he doesn't know everything, just put that on the shelf for a minute, but he does. He's walking, and this man was yelling and yelling and yelling. So I'm sure everybody would have heard. And he calls him over. And this is where it gets strange, in my humble opinion. Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want? I'm thinking, I think it should be obvious what he wants. You know, he didn't want a camel. He doesn't want to drink of water. He wants to have his sight. So what can we take from that? Because I don't think Jesus was just trying to be funny. I don't think Jesus missed the point. I don't think he was distracted. So what's going on there? What do you want from me? I think it's because Jesus wants to tell us that we need to go to him in prayer. Jesus is asking us, what do we want? And if we stay in his book and read, we know what we want and we know what we need. And we can ask for it freely and openly. So it is a strange thing, but I think we can learn from it and grow from it. As he asked the man, what do you want? But you see, the blind man doesn't go, I've been yelling ever since you walked past, and you were walking past, so you must have heard me long before you came close and long after. He doesn't add anything. He just knows, and he's in the moment, as we need to be in the moment. When we ask Jesus, he says, Rabbi, that I may receive my sight. I love how Jesus requests, what do you want? And he responds. He's saying to us, what do you want? And we should respond. So Jesus was able to affirm him, to have grace and mercy on him. And he healed him immediately. What a fantastic story. He received his sight and followed him. And that's how we always finish this passage. And what a wonderful story. As I said, it was strange. Why would you ask? But he's asking us, what do we want? And we're told he joins them. Not that he became one of the disciples or one of the 12, but he joined them on the crowd to the pilgrimage, so that he could probably give sacrifice of thanksgiving when he got to the temple. So what a wonderful story. How Bartimaeus his eyes were open. And let our eyes be open. What are we asking for? What do we want? And if we live by the words of God, we should know what we want and ask for it. So what a wonderful thing he did. He was standing by the road, in the road, and now he's on the road. And he's walking with them. He's fellowshipping with them. He's got the sight back. He can see. And that's so important that we saw that interaction, how his faith has made him whole, and he followed him. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind. And sometimes I miss on the prayer list one time. I remember years ago, there was a girl in our church, and she had kidney stones. So I put her on the prayer list. And she just stayed on the prayer list. I got distracted, whatever. Her mother one time said to me, why is her name on the prayer list? I says, well, she says, for the kidney stones. She said, oh, she had the kidney stones, they're fine, everything's good. And I says, what we really should do is keep her on a prayer list to be praised, to give thanks. See, Bartimaeus was on the way. Now he's along the way. He's following. And it would have been easy for Bartimaeus to say, hey, I can see now. I'm going to go work. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do that. Thanks, Jesus, but I really don't want anything to do with you anymore. You've served my purpose, and we'll move on. And we can get caught up in that. But we see how he follows him. And what a wonderful picture of Jesus. Just in that one exchange. What a contrast between the Son of David, Jesus, is in the company of a former blind man who has come alongside and said, come with us. Let's all go to Jerusalem. Because I think a warrior king coming in, as some people thought Jesus would enter Jerusalem, would have been very, very different. I think he would have destroyed this lame blind man. I don't need him. He's a distraction, and he's just going to bring us all down. But Jesus, in his healing, shows that dignity that Jesus had for everyone, the love he had for everyone, and how we need to have that love for everybody. So I love this story. And I love how it comes around and just the exchange of it. And I must have loved it as a kid, because here's somebody yelling and screaming. And he doesn't get in trouble, but he gets healed, which is good. I thought maybe as a young child yelling and screaming, making lots of noise. But we see that he's heard. And we do get that strange exchange, but I hope we can understand from it. Jesus wants to know, what do you want? He asked Bartimaeus that day, and he's asking us today too. What do you want? And that's a wonderful way to pray. Now, Bartimaeus was standing right in front of Jesus, so he could give him all the information he needed. We don't stand in front of Jesus per se, not in that way. But he's asking us, what do you want? So, what do we want? When we pray, let's think about what we want. So I don't know what you've been asked or what you're asking or hoping for, but I hope it is. And I hope you will reply to that. Because Jesus is asking him and everybody, what do you want? What do you want? And what a wonderful question. Strange question, but when we look at it all, it's a wonderful question. And to say, what do you want? So if you're ready to take that first step and say, I know what I want. I want my Lord and Savior to be Jesus Christ. And if you said that, we have baptism. And think about baptism. And just in your day-to-day walk, if you're shouting out, don't let people tell you to be quiet. Come to Jesus, because he wants to know what you want. And he does. He will ask you. So, wherever you are, I'm giving you the invitation today to come forward with me, and I'll pray with you as we close our service.